Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining the LinkedIn Live event today with the Startup Game Changer and Startup Steroid. Today, we are going to talk about the legal consideration in SPV formation. My guest speaker is a great friend of mine, Hayek Mamazian. He is an attorney here in Los Angeles. He is the founder and managing attorney of HBM Law Firm. As I said, in Los Angeles, he specializes in corporate law, venture capital, and merger and acquisition. Welcome to the show, Hayek.
Thank you so much, Anshuman. I appreciate you having me on. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending which part of the world you are in. I'm Hayek Mamajanian. Very nice to meet you all. I am the founder and managing attorney of HVM Law Firm. We work with venture capital funds, private equity funds, enterprises, and entrepreneurs, representing them in different investment, acquisition, financial, and corporate deals. And with respect to today's topic, SPVs or special purpose vehicles, we have assisted our clients over the last few years with over $200 million of SPV and fund formation and structuring deals. So this is a core practice area for us, and I'm happy to share some insights with you. And today, yes, and today we'll talk.
Go ahead.
And today we'll talk about special purpose vehicles or special purpose entities, SPVs, within the context of the tech industry, because we're going to discuss how to utilize these structures to invest in tech startups. But first, before getting into the legal considerations, I want to talk about a few basic concepts and answer a few basic questions, such as what is an SPV in the first place? So special purpose vehicles, it's a syndication of investors in one legal entity in order to pull capital from them and make an investment in a startup in our case. So essentially, investors get together, they create a separate entity, they invest their money in this new entity, which is separate from all these individuals. And then this special purpose vehicle or the SPV itself, the legal entity, invests in a startup. And this is very similar and confusing with venture capital funds because both are legal entities, but there are some fundamental differences between venture capital funds and special purpose vehicles, SPVs. So in a fund structure, you're really investing in multiple startups. So you're diversifying the risk a little bit. In a special purpose vehicle, at 95% of the times, you're investing in one startup only. But in addition to this simple difference, the other difference that has some legal implications is that in a VC fund, you delegate the decision making of which startups to invest in to the manager, to the investment advisor, the venture capital firm, which is not the case in an SPV, because in an SPV, you choose to participate or not in a specific SPV on a case-by-case basis. And because of this delegation of the decision-making, some conflicts arise. And because of that, the legal structures and legal considerations of venture capital funds are a little more complex than the ones for SPVs. So, but for today's purposes, we're going to focus on the SPVs. We won't be talking about venture capital funds much. So we know what an SPV is. So we know the difference between an SPV and a VC fund. Next, why we need an SPV in the first place, right? Why would you need to pull the capital in one legal entity, go to the trouble to create this legal entity, do everything else, regulatory requirements, comply with them, draft the contracts? And the reasons are very simple and they're diverse. Number one would be, let's say the minimum investment amount is $1 million. I know the startup, I trust them, I know they're going to succeed, but I have only $500,000. But I have 5 more friends who I know can invest extra $100,000 each so we can reach the minimum investment amount. So that's one of the reasons why you would want to create an SPV to meet the minimum investment amount. Sometimes it's not because of the investment amount, but because the cap table management issues for the startups. They don't want to have 10 investors, let's say $100,000 each on their cap table. Instead, they would want to see one special purpose vehicle, one legal entity that invests as one investor $1 million. So that's a consideration as well for the startups to manage their cap table. And sometimes it's just a group of friends, everyone has different abilities, different skills, different knowledge, and it's good to work together because someone can be a great legal advisor, someone can be a great product expert, someone can be great at business development or tech part of the startup. So it's also good to have this syndicate and work together, do due diligence together, and make investments as one group. And what we have been seeing a lot recently, and this is where our practice really focuses on mostly, sometimes we also see venture capital funds and private equity funds themselves creating special purpose vehicles for their investments. And this sometimes happens when the investment is really large, $100 million investment, and they can make only, let's say, 20 million from their fund, but they do have an LP, a limited partner base, investor base, to put together a special purpose vehicle to raise extra 80 million to invest 100 million. So again, there are different reasons why you would need an SPV, and those are mostly cap table management for startups, meeting the minimum investment amounts. Sometimes private equity funds and VC funds need that as well, and just angel groups, people just like to do due diligence together to minimize the risk and invest as a group rather than as individuals. And by the way, I'm looking at my notes, so yes, I'm cheating, but this is for your good. Please bear with me. So next question, how to set up an SPV. Now we know what an SPV is. Now we know why we need it. So how do we set up one, right? And it's a pretty formal process. First, you have to go to the state that you want to incorporate in. Usually, it's the state of Delaware because that's the most tested state for LLCs, limited liability companies. And usually, the SPVs are limited liability companies or limited partnerships. And for both entities, Delaware would be one of the best states your legal entity. So first step, you have to form a legal entity. In addition to that, you have to draft the organizational and governance documents for your SPV, and we'll discuss that in more detail in a little bit. And in addition to drafting those documents, you also have to make some regulatory filings. And instead of doing this yourself, right, sometimes it's just easier to go to a platform like Startup Steroid or SPV Hub and have them handle this, because these are really detailed and technical steps, and it's very easy to make a mistake, and one mistake can really cost you a lot in the future. And I will also talk about when you would need to seek legal advice from a lawyer, but I would assume for the most of the cases, investing up to $1 million, maybe even more, very simple transaction, a startup, you should definitely reach out to a Startup Steroid SPV Hub and work with them, because it will really make sure that the process is very effective, efficient, and the risk of making mistakes is really minimized. So definitely consider doing that. So that's the simple setup. Form a legal entity, draft the documents, make regulatory filings, and reach out to a platform like Startup Steroid to help you with the process to avoid any major mistakes. So next, what documents should an SPV have, right? It's a legal entity, which means there's a lot of legal formalities to satisfy, but also because this is a group of investors with an organizer, there are some issues to regulate within this group as well. So the first thing that we almost always recommend and do for our clients is to have a term sheet. Term sheet is the summary, a simple summary of the economic terms of the SPV, right? How large it is, what is the minimum check size, how many investors it has, what company it invests in, probably the most important thing, which company is it investing in, are there any management fees, carried interest, expenses. So those are the things that all investors should keep in mind when investing in SPV, trying to understand all these details, which company I'm investing in, who's the manager, what are the sizes of the total investment and minimum checks, and the rest of the economic considerations. So make sure to have a term sheet, and I know that Steroid provides a very good, concise term sheet for these purposes. Second document is the operating agreement of the limited liability company, or the limited partnership agreement of the limited partnership, if you go with a limited partnership. And this is the constitution, the main document of the SPV, regulating the relationship between the manager and the investors, between the investors, among the investors, and also the SPV and the investors. So it really addresses all these different uh, stakeholders, puts together some processes that everyone needs to follow within the organization. But even though operating agreements can get very complicated, very complex, SPV operating agreements, especially simple ones, don't have to be too complex because, again, it's just one investment. There is no continuous decision making. There are no follow on investments within the same SPV. Sometimes there are, but not necessarily. So, because of lack of these economic activities within the SPV other than the first investment, there isn't a lot of need to make the documents too complex. And again, Ashima can help you with that as well. So term sheet,
Sure.
operating agreement. The third document is the subscription agreement. And this is an agreement between a specific investor and the SPV. So this is the document through which an investor makes its capital commitment, its capital contribution to the SPV. Again, very important formal document, has to be in place and has to be signed by each investor and the SPV. Next, you also want to make sure you have some investor questionnaires in place. This is for know your customer and anti-money laundering purposes. Again, Startup Steroid and platforms like that can help you to streamline this process. So definitely consider that, because again, you've got to ask all these questions. And if you don't ask certain questions, don't get the right responses, you may be in trouble down the road. So using the platform is definitely a good idea. And the last step really is to also put together some disclosures, risk disclosures. Why? Because when we talk about investments, especially with our friends, with our investors, we usually talk about the upside, the good things about the company, how great the startup is, how easy the setup of the SPV is, how easy it should be for the investors to invest in it, and then the SPV invest in the startup. But we don't really talk a lot about the risks inherent in investing in startups. So it's very important to also have a risk for investors. It's called investment considerations or risk factors. That really lays out the risks of startup investing, and also make sure that the investors have a chance to review it before fully committing to the SPV. And by the way, all of these things are available with the platform, so definitely consider talking to Anshuman about all these different steps. One additional step that may complicate the structure a little bit is a situation when it's a group that really creates SPVs on a continuous basis, on a regular basis. Maybe you create 10, 20 SPVs a year. And in that case, if this becomes a core business for the organizer, for the manager of the SPV, then it could make sense to maybe create a management company, even create a general partner that will receive the management fee and the carried interest. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And if that takes place, then these entities need to have their own documents, but then also the management company needs to have a management agreement signed with all SPVs. So again, this is not something that comes up a lot in the context of the platforms, but If you're a VC fund, a private equity fund, these are definitely very, very important considerations: creating the management company, the general partner, and the management agreement between the SPVs and management company that manages the SPV. So we discussed managers. So the next question would be, what are the roles within an SPV, right? We know we have stakeholders, maybe 10 people, but what are their roles, their duties, their functions with this SPV? So the manager or the organizer, really the person who initiates the SPV, the idea of the SPV. They're most likely the person who knows the startup very well, who wants to help the startup, invest in it, and then it brings everyone else. It's sometimes one of the investors. Sometimes it could be an angel group, right? That starts the SPV. Sometimes it's a venture capital fund or a private equity fund, as we discussed. But the managers need to understand that the role of a manager comes with some duties as well. If you are a manager in an LLC or limited partnership, by law, you have statutory fiduciary duties to all investors. Fiduciary duties in this context would be duty of loyalty, duty of care, duty of fair dealing, and there's a few other duties as well. The good news is that under the Delaware law, you can waive some of these duties. You can waive the duty of care. You can limit the duty of loyalty. You can't really limit or eliminate duty of fair dealing. That's a very fundamental principle. So consider doing that after discussing it with your investors, because especially this a favor to your friends putting together an investment vehicle. You don't really want to be on the hook down the road if things go south, and you want to be careful with the legal considerations. So as a manager, be mindful of the fiduciary duties and try to address it if possible. And the second group, the larger group, in addition to the manager or the managers, is the investor group. So those are the investors, and investors are passive investors, passive participants in the SPV. The only important function they do is really to contribute the capital to the SPV in order to make the investment. And because there aren't a lot of decisions to be made down the road, you usually don't participate in the decision making. But sometimes I wouldn't be surprised if someone who is an anchor investor is someone who's a major investor, meaning they invest a lot of money. They're very important for the SPV, maybe even for the startup. So if you invest a lot of money in the SPV, you might have the leverage to negotiate certain rights for yourself, anchor investors, such as when to liquidate, how to liquidate, when to sell our position, how to liquidate our position. So all these decisions can be subject to your approval, or at least a discussion with you if you are a anchor investor in the SPV. So two roles: management and investors. Next, so now we know that managers have some duties. They get paid for putting together the SPV. It really depends. Sometimes you see managers doing this because they want to help the investor group to start investing. They want to help the startup, and sometimes they don't charge a management fee or a carried interest. But if it's a venture capital fund or someone who does this as a business for themselves to make money, then most likely you will see both, or at least one of the management fee or the carried interest in the structure of your SPV. And the management fee is pretty simple. Let's say you invest $100,000. There's a 5% management fee. That means that 5,000 goes to the manager to cover the overhead, and then the 95,000 will be invested directly in the startup. So that's the management fee. That's it. It really is. It's really there to cover the cost, the overhead of the manager, because the managers travel, they pay their own employees, they pay themselves to be able to source, find right opportunities, do due diligence, and bring to you vetted that it's startups. So that's the management fee. What is the carried interest? The carried interest is really the profit sharing mechanism in SPV, similar to venture capital funds, where the manager shares the upside of the investment, meaning the investment return. Imagine a situation, again, you invest $100,000. Now you will receive $200,000 because the startup did well, and you guys sold your SPV stake in the startup for $200,000. So you will receive your $100,000 back, and then the managers will receive usually 20%, sometimes 10%, depending on the transaction. And then the manager will receive 20, 10, 15, 5%, whatever the deal is, of the extra $100,000. So this is a very good way to align the incentives of the investors with the managers. Why? Because essentially managers don't make any real money until there was a successful exit. And even in that case, they have to first return your capital, your 100K, and then they will share only the upside, if there is an upside, of the extra 100K in our example. So management fee paid up front, and then carried interest, sharing the profits with the managers. Also, pay attention to some other additional expenses in the SPV documents. Sometimes you would see an extra charge in addition to the management fee and the carried interest for some admin expenses, CPAs, lawyers, platform fees, admin fees. So make sure you understand those terms very well, because you do want to know how much of your $100,000 will be invested in the startup and how much will be kept for management fee, expenses, and other costs.
Right.
So 2 more questions to go very quickly. What are the regulatory filings? We talked about this a little bit. So definitely you should think about filing Form D. There's some nuances and situations where you might not have to file Form D, but the rule of thumb is to really go ahead and file a Form D. I'm not sure if the platform provides Form D services. Anshuman, do you provide Form D filing services?
No, that we don't do.
Okay. So make sure to cover the Form Ds when necessary. Sometimes, if the organizer, the manager,
Sorry, hi. On the compliance side, we do the Form D and the Edgar filing and the Blue Sky filing. So that is a complete process that SPV Hub does. Yeah.
beautiful.
And that is included in the fee that we have for
Beautiful.
each SPV, ranging from $5,000 to $10,000.
So beautiful. Once you pay Startup Steroid for everything else, Form D is also covered, which is wonderful. Because
Form D, Blue Sky filing, 10 years of tax filing and K1 processing. Everything is included in one fee.
Beautiful. That's half of the things, more than half of the things you have to worry about. So Form D being the most important. So thank you for that. So Form D is covered under Startup Steroid platform. Then sometimes for managers, for organizers that do this as a business, again, they set up 10 SPVs a year. They charge management fee, they charge carried interest. Sometimes they should also look into Form ADV filing, and this is the filing for exempt reporting advisors. So if you're investing only in startups and tech opportunities, then you're probably a venture capital advisor. You will fall under venture capital advisor exemption, which is great, which means you don't have to register with the government, with the SEC and FINRA, but you still need to file reports on an annual basis. So if you are someone who is in the business of creating SPVs and investing in startups, think about filing Form ADV and reach out to a lawyer. And then, as Anshuman said, there are some annual filings with the legal entities. The tax returns as well is something that you want to be on top of with your CPA, with your accountant. Yeah. And the next thing that has been coming up a lot, and we've discussed this with Anshuman a few times in the past, is the beneficial ownership reporting. This is funny because up until earlier this year, we used to tell folks, oh, US legal system is amazing because you don't have to, you don't have to file, you don't have to report who are the beneficial owners. It has changed recently. As of January 1st, there is an obligation to report beneficial ownership to the government with respect to each legal entity. But the good news is that there is an exemption that applies to SPVs directly. And the exemption is called pooled investment vehicle exemption. And as you can imagine, we've been talking about pooling investments for 30 minutes now. So SPVs are vehicles that pool investments. So we really fall under this exemption. So usually you don't have to make any filings with FinCEN for beneficial ownership reporting with respect to SPVs. There are some exemptions though, and these exemptions apply to registered investment advisors. If you are a registered investment advisor that has more than 150 million under management, assets under management, or if you invest in tech startups, but also in real estate and private equity investments, if you have a diversified portfolio, then most likely you will have to register with the government as a registered investment advisor. And if you do, and you end up creating an SPV, then most likely your SPV will not fall under the pooled investment vehicle exemption, and you will have to make the beneficial ownership reporting. So if you're a registered advisor, reach out to a lawyer. If not, most likely you don't have to do that. But again, this is an evolving area of law. It's pretty new. So new rules and regulations can come up in the future. So make sure to just keep yourself updated about these issues to be able to address these reporting requirements on a regular basis.
Yeah, Hayek, I have a quick question, a follow-up question on the BOI. A series LLC, but the organizer of that series LLC is carrying a carried interest and a management fee, but that person or company is not a registered agent. So do they fall under the BOI and they will have to file, or they will still be considered the pooled investor group and they don't have to file for the BOI? So an organizer who is taking a carried interest and a management fee.
Very good question. So just based on the plain reading of the rules, the current rules, which may change in the future, even when you charge a management fee and a carried interest, but you're not a registered investment advisor, you're most likely exempt from the obligation of beneficial ownership reporting. But then again, evolving area of law, a lot of changes happening on a regular basis. So make sure to read more about this. And I know Anshuman is a great resource for these things because we discuss all these issues on a regular basis. And if something has changes, we'll make sure to let you guys know through social media or doing something similar to what we're doing now to make sure that you guys are updated. But again, it's not necessarily about the economics of the SPV. It's about the status of the organizer. Are you registered investment advisor or not? If you're not, then you have a little more breathing room, a little more flexibility in terms of reporting requirements.
Okay,
and then
great.
The last question, this is the only question that is self-serving to myself. And I know that people don't like lawyers because everything they say is self-serving. You're like, oh, why are you talking about yourself so much? But this is important because I also want to make sure that you understand what really triggers the need to reach out to a lawyer with respect to setting up or structuring an SPV. And in my notes, I'm seeing that it's really about professional managers who set up SPVs on a regular basis. They have a need for a management company. They also want to have a general partner entity that really receives the carried interest. It's a holding company doing nothing, not managing anything, just holding the main assets. And those are mostly venture capital funds, private equity funds, some more formalized, officialized syndication of investors. So those are the people that need to reach out to a lawyer for assistance with these more intricate issues. But pretty much for everything else, you can work with Anshuman, and they're great. And then those are the situations when a series LLC would make a lot of sense, as Anshuman just mentioned. If you're in the business of creating a lot of SPVs, 10, 20 a year, then setting up a series LLC structure with an ability to create sub-series of LLCs, which are the actual SPVs, would be helpful. Series LLC is a very complex structure. We could just talk about it for like hours and hours. Just make sure that you understand the concept and know what questions to ask, especially if you are in the business of investing in startups and setting up SPVs.
Yeah, thank you so much, Hayek. We are at the half-hour timestamp now, and for the viewers and for the viewers who will be consuming it when we start posting it in reels and shorts. Hayek is a great attorney here, in Los Angeles. If you have any questions related to your business requirements and business needs, please reach out to him. His contact details will be listed in the posting that we'll be doing of this video. Thank you so much, Hayek, for coming on the show and helping us out with the legal consideration in SPV formation. With you, certainly, maybe a month later or sometime, we would like to do, on the BOI, because, it is a complex thing and it is such new that, we need to inform our SPV managers and folks who are interested in creating SPV and all. So it would be a great learning for them. But for today, thank you so much. Truly appreciate it.
No, thank you for the opportunity. So now more work for me. Now I have to worry about the BOI filings, right? But no, I appreciate the opportunity to speak with your audience. I know how great they are. And thanks everyone for joining. It was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you.